Hello, and welcome to Alternative Counseling's videos and podcasts. This is our fifth one, and it is about addictions. And I'm going to explain how addictions are created from a cellular level, and then I'm going to talk about how addictions are learned and also how addictions are developed because of things that we've ingested. One of the first things I'd like to talk about is the causes of addiction. And before I get into the research and all the causes that I have on my board, I would like to tell you a little bit about the blood-brain barrier. And again, I'm a biologist, so you get mine from the cellular level, my mental health. But in between the two brain halves is a blood-brain barrier. This barrier is there to protect the brain from harmful toxins. However, if we start to take alcohol, cigarettes, illegal drugs, prescription drugs, or other pesticides and contaminants, and they permeate that blood-brain barrier. In other words, they cross the blood-brain barrier, and we'll talk about opiates and narcotics and why they do that. But it makes that barrier more permeable so that more toxins and more bad things can get through to the other side of the brain. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about genetics. And the research on genetics is that it's very weak because there's not a lot of identical twin studies. In order to have a good study on cause and effect and genetics, we would have to take identical twins born at birth and separate them from the parents so they're not around the drugs or the alcohol that the parent was using, and see if the new environment changes everything. Okay? So is it the way we're born, nature, or is it nurture? And the difference is the research does not tease apart learning theory from the parents versus genetic from the natural parents. So I'm not really going to bring in a lot of the genetic research because, again, without the identical twin studies, I don't think it's very strong at all. The one thing that I want to point out too is neurological influence. And again, this is if the mother or even the father is addicted to heavy drugs or alcohol. When the child is born, there's a severe neurological influence. And we notice that on their APGAR score, and that's a score of how well they're developed and how well they're sucking and responding and things like that, is much lower in children born to addictive parents, particularly addictive moms in this country. And also the dopamine, it plays an important role in our ability to calm ourselves down. If that's blocked and we can't calm ourselves down, then we overreact to everything. And if you continuously do that, you want to calm yourself down, you're going to use whatever substance you can get your hands on, illegal or legal, okay? And I mean that from a PTSD even point of view, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But neurological influence is that dopamine plays an important role. And of course, serotonin too, because serotonin is our happy chemical. And when our little cup, imagine a little cup in your head, and it's full of serotonin. And so every day or so, it drops a few drops in, to keep you on a nice even keel. However, if you use drugs or alcohol or even nicotine, that serotonin gets dumped into the blood. The cup is empty, and there's nothing left there for later. That's when the depression sets in. That's why alcohol is a depressant, because it causes depression by using up all of your good hormones. Family dynamics is another cause, and this one is particularly interesting because parents will teach their child what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So in other words, if they have a child and they say, put your seatbelt on, okay? And they put them all on their seatbelt, but the parent doesn't wear his seatbelt. When that child gets old enough, he's going to stop wearing his seatbelt. And unfortunately, that's not a good habit to develop. But those are the kind of family dynamics that children learn. They don't learn by what you say, they learn by what you do. And the other thing is, what is acceptable and what is not. Those values usually come from within the family. So religion, politics, teaching your children about money, the value of education, all of that comes from the parents thinking and the child learning from what's good and what's bad through the parent. The other thing that parents teach is boundaries, okay? And boundaries are very important. When I was growing up, at age 12, my family was killed by a drunk driver in a car accident. After that, I wouldn't go near alcohol. I wouldn't even go near the kids that were drinking. And this was in the 60s when you could get alcohol pretty easy. I didn't go near any of that, and I never have drank in my life. That is learning theory, okay? I learned from what happened that I do not want to, that's my boundaries. I do not want to cross that line. However, parents also exemplify habits and teach self-discipline. And this is where I think the crux of addiction comes from, the lack of self-discipline. And so we think that if we teach our child to wait or to do without, and you don't have to teach them to do without food for days, but to wait in the car until we get home to get something to eat is a normal thing, okay? But most parents won't do that. They'll stop at McDonald's real quick and give immediate gratification. And the problem with that immediate gratification is that child, when it grows up, it expects that immediate gratification from every single thing, from job, from work, from parents, from everything. It doesn't expect or have learned to endure discomfort. Does that make sense? Because discomfort teaches us to appreciate little things. Also, poverty and hunger. Those are family dynamics. Not that you can help the poverty part necessarily. However, we do find that people who are more educated, have better jobs, own businesses, are more involved in the community, in the church, in the schools and things, make better parents. So the parent that is a recluse, that does not interact well, that is antisocial, these things are going to show up in poverty and result in hunger because they don't plan. They don't learn that saving even 25 cents a day adds up. They want immediate gratification. They want it all at once. Well, why should I do without my pulled pork sandwich this week and eat refried beans and tortillas instead? And again, that's what you've learned from the family of origin. The other thing that I put in is coping with trauma, PTSD, loss. Those things can develop into addictions. If you haven't learned to cope with severe events, you're a young person and you join the military and you get both your legs shot off and you come back, you're going to be in trauma. And you're not going to be able to see anything hopeful or positive because you haven't developed those skills yet. You haven't pulled yourself out of a hole yet. So now you've got to pull yourself out of a severe hole. And this is a time when pain, narcotics, and opiates can become very addictive and can sort of numb you from what's really happening and what you should really be dealing with. Also, my favorite one, TV. I have never owned a television, but in watching the children that I counsel in the school districts that I've worked in, I have found that TV glamorizes the drugs and alcohol. All the kids think it's cool, okay? Unless their parents have stepped in and explained why it's not. And they admire and love and cherish their parent. They have a close relationship with that parent. Then they will listen. So for parents that are sporadic, don't visit, don't interact, don't spend their spare time with their children, those parents aren't going to develop that deep trust and relationship where the child's going to say, I know my dad's right, or I know my mom's right, and I'm going to follow their rules, okay? Because I trust them. And so that's where TV glamorizes drugs and alcohol and makes parents look very bad. And it looks like kids rule the world, which is a really sad thing because they're not ready. They haven't endured or learned what they need to learn. So TV glamorizes drugs and alcohol. We'll talk a little bit deeper about this in another video, but I'm going to talk a little bit about treatment due to time, because if I go over 15 minutes, YouTube punishes me by making my download 3 days long. So treatment for addictions. There are 3 treatments in my research that keep appearing, okay? One is CBD, cognitive behavioral. And this is stimulus control. So this is where I take the alcohol or the drugs and I get them out of my house or I get them out of my life. This is coping with triggers, removal of the stimulus. So a trigger might be that I come home on Friday nights and I'm single and I'm alone and I'm feeling sorry for myself. So I grab a beer or a glass of wine or a cocktail and I soothe myself, okay? That kind of self-soothing is going to lead to addictions. Because you don't have the dopamine to calm yourself and soothe yourself, as in yoga or meditation, you don't have the ability to bring that blood pressure down, bring that, breathing down, all of that, and calm down. CBD helps you learn about that, okay? Dopamine fasting. Now, this is avoiding and reducing triggers and stimulus. This is where you would say, okay, I'm not going to hang out with John anymore on Friday nights because he loves to go to the sports bars. I always spend too much money, drink too much, and then the next day I'm hungover and I get nothing done. I would rather spend my Saturdays getting things done around the yard, the boat, the house, whatever. So dopamine fasting is avoiding triggers and stimulus. It is a way of altering your environment, but not your thinking, okay? Stinking thinking comes along with the CBD. That is where you're thinking, oh, just one drink won't matter. Oh, I've been without a cigarette for a week. I'm shaking. I need another one right now. That kind of thinking is called stinking thinking, falls under CBD, stimulus control, okay? But again, it doesn't really deal with the cause. And the cause of addiction, I think, is lack of self-discipline. That when we go to Japan, addictive rates are less than 2%. They don't have heroin users on the street with needles laying all over the gutters. They don't have the opiate addiction and the pharmaceutical pain medication addiction that we have, the rate that we have in America. They say 1 in 5 in Americans is addicted to pain meds. And if you look at seniors, it's even worse. And I'm over 65, so I know what my friends and relatives and other people are coping with, okay? And self-discipline is also important because that leads to saving money. It leads to furthering your education. It leads to research and resolve, like if you're going to buy a car, do you want to see, has it ever been recalled? How does Consumer Reports rate it? Those kind of things, okay? That would be somebody with self-discipline. They wait. They don't just run out on impulse and buy a $50,000 car or, credit card something. So self-discipline begins when you're a child, a very young child. When you're 4 or 5 years old and mom says, you have to learn to wait, that's when you're starting to learn self-discipline. But if you don't want to learn it, if you have figured out a way around it as a young kid, then you could develop a personality disorder. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about personality disorders. But dependent, avoidant, even psychopathy, is a personality style. It's how you approach problems, how you approach issues in life. And without this self-discipline, you're going to approach them too impulsively, and you're going to make some bad decisions. And then, of course, you're going to have to drink or drug because those bad decisions are going to have bad effects on your life. The other one is detox. A lot of the research, and you can look at my site at www.alternativescounseling.llc.com and see that detox. And I like detox with the spirulina and the chlorella because it's a food. And being a food, it's not addictive. When the FDA declares something as a food, it has to be safe for a newborn infant. It cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. It cannot be addictive. So today, if sugar were put in front of the FDA, they would not legalize it. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. Thank you for listening. And there's more on my website. Again, www.alternativescounselingllc.com. And I wish you all peace and happiness.